Most people don't even realize what fiat currency is. They don't understand what fractional reserve banking is. And many Americans, I'm sure that most of the people who are listening to this realize that our founding fathers knew very, very clearly that to have a free nation is that we had to have our banking system controlled by the people, that we had to have a hard currency so that money had value. Money had value. But the large bankers came in and they created fractional reserve banking. They created fractional banking and fiat currency. And since the beginning of this country, as I'm sure you've heard over and over again, has been the battle between the people and the populace who want to help the people of this country through a hard currency, through true money that has value, as opposed to the oligarchy, the small handful of people who control the strings and who make money a commodity. It doesn't take a PhD or even a master's or even a degree in economics to figure this out. If you just take a few minutes, they are creating money out of thin air and then multiplying it and multiplying it and multiplying it. And then they are able to take your collateral, your business, your home, your auto, take it as collateral, and then you have to pay interest to them. It is the biggest Ponzi scheme in the history of this world. And because it is unsustainable, we are at the end game right now. And Brother Obama and all of his buddies, like Geithner and the others, are just cutting the necks of all the good people, Democrats, Republicans, independents, rich, poor, everybody. And friends, this is what Alex and what other people have been sharing with you for the last 15 years. And the time is right now. And we can either see it with fear, or we can see it as a time of change, as a time of shifting. And if we organize, we can turn this thing around.
Well, that's very well said, George Humphrey, economist, here visiting with us today. I've got a whole list of questions I want to go through with you. We can do this on air, part of it, and then off air later for the film I'm making. They're going to be a big part of it. It'll be a lot more than the 6 or 7 minutes you're in the previous film, because this one's going to be a lot more of you and Tarpley in it. Specifically, for people that don't understand fractional reserve banking, I mean, they know it's fiat, they know it's made out of nothing. But when we hear that, when the public hears that trillions of dollars are being given to central banks, or that central banks are giving trillions of dollars to private banks, those private banks are the public component of the very same private bank, the Federal Reserve. It's a consortium or a combine. So they take our tax money to give their fiat value. They pay it to themselves, and to pay them our tax money, we then have to pay interest. So we're not just paying in the money we give them for nothing. Then we have to pay interest for the pleasure of giving them the money. I mean, this is a Ponzi scheme of all Ponzi schemes to the power of infinity.
It's absolutely amazing, and it's happening right out in front of us, and and they realize that they can do this because, as Adolf Hitler said, the bigger the lie, the easier it is to pull it off. And this is right in front of us. The Federal Reserve Board has the Treasury, orders the Treasury to print up, quote, money. And the Treasury takes paper and ink and prints this stuff up. And then the Fed pays the Treasury about 2.5 or 3 cents on the dollar. And then they lend it to the Federal Reserve regional banks, and then they lend it to the other banks. And now they're not even doing that because they're starting to monetize the debt, which we'll go into in a little bit. But these banks get money from the Fed, and then they can lend it out at a 10-to-1 level. So let's say that they get $10 billion so that they then can lend out $100 or $90 million, $1 billion. And then when they get some of that money
Start
back.
Start over on that.
Okay. So let's say that a bank gets $100 billion from the Federal Reserve. And then they start lending that out at a 9-to-1 level. So it's $900 billion that they can lend out that's on their books. But then they get the money back and they put that in their, quote, reserves, and then they can lend that out again. So their book value is not $100 billion, it's not $900 billion, it's 72 times the original amount that they have in. And this all starts with nothing. Paper and ink, and then they get the interest from the industries, from the small businesses, from the auto dealers, from the people cutting lawns, from you and me, that comes back. And it is money out of thin air. And the multiplication factors on this are so monstrous. And the multiplication factors used to be much smaller. It was still wrong then, but then they upped it and upped it and upped it and upped it. And now, for every dollar that comes into a private bank, they can multiply, if they do their work properly, by 72 times. This is true insanity, considering that there is nothing there to begin with.
And that's where derivatives come in. They need to keep pumping the bubble so they can skim the money off the top and buy real assets. And when it finally implodes, they leave us with the black hole of debt. They run off with all the real assets and say, we'll save you. We'll bring in a complete world tyranny and regulate every facet of your life and give you hundreds of new carbon taxes on everything you do. This is how we're going to fix everything. I mean, just amazing. So let's talk about where this is going, what this is going to do, how this is going to end when we get back with George Humphrey, economist, author, lecturer, former Austin City Council member, and most important, my good buddy, coming up. He's in the current Obama deception, but he's also going to be in the new Obama film that's out July 4th. Stay with us. Coming up a little bit later in the next hour, we'll open the phones up for all of you that are holding. Toll-free number to join us, 1-800-259-9231. Don't forget, I'm Alex Jones. My website's rnfowars.com and prisonplanet.com. We're simulcasting for all our great prisonplanet.tv members on the TV end with the radio show at prisonplanet.tv. George Humphrey with us till the end of the transmission today. And I got a million questions for you, George. So we were getting up to the point of explaining, and I know most of the audience knows this, but your neighbors, your friends, your family, they just think the bankers screwed up and, boy, we got to give them all this money and it's financial terrorism. They say, give us all this power or everything's going to end, everything's going to fall apart. When they're all rubbing their hands together, laughing, giggling, writing white papers, how they engineered it, laughing at how they're going to destroy the middle class. I mean, this is how we knew all this was going to happen, because these guys all bragged about it. And we'd say, look at this book, look at this document, they wrote it. They're going to do this. You know, George, wrote books about this 12 years ago. And now it's all here. And he said the derivatives. I mean, I remember listening to books on tape you made, in 1998, driving around in my car, and hearing you talk about derivatives. And I mean, you're an economist. So they knew they were setting this up. So let's go back to George. Break down how this fiat system works and how it's going to end, what they want to set up through making us dependent.
Well, the fiat system is a system of theft. And it's been around for a long, long time, and that's why in the Bible is that there are 17 references not against usury. But the reality is that the central bankers realize that by using fiat currency is that they can create so-called money out of nothing. They can create so-called money out of nothing. And if they can convince the people that they have something of value, which they have done, and a fiat is simply means the declaration of the king or the president. And so that's why we call it fiat currency. And so what was done is that in 1913, with the creation of the Federal Reserve Banking Act, is that the Federal Reserve was created. And of course, all of you, I'm sure, are aware, the Federal Reserve is not federal, there's no reserves, and it is owned by European bankers for the most part. It's never been accounted. The GIO has never been able to come in and take a look at it. And what they do is that and according to Greenspan, they are a completely independent agency that is above the law of the United States. And Greenspan just said this last week on television. It's just truly amazing. And so what they do is that they order the Treasury to print up money. Now, money for them is just basically paper and ink. Then they take this so-called money and lend it to the Federal Reserve regional banks in Dallas and New York and San Francisco and Denver and around the country. And then they lend that money to the, quote, private banks, which at this time are becoming nationalized very, very quickly. And so when they lend this money to the private banks, is that they get a certain interest back. But then the private banks can put that on their books, and let's say that they borrow $1 billion. They can lend out $10 billion. And then as the people start paying that money back, and let's say they pay that money back, then they can lend that out again at another percent.